It's time to go inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix. With your host, Jimi Brent.
All right, welcome to Inside the Matrix. Today, my guest is James Horak. James is not from this world, and he'll, I'm sure, be sharing more about that in a little bit. He reveals to us what the objects in the corona of the sun, photographed by NASA, are. In deference to Dr. Norman Begron, he describes the EMVs, electromagnetic vehicles, and explains humanity's call on the Earth right now. James is the author of the book Siege in the Davis Mountains and is a prolific writer on his blog site, which is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. He is also a frequent guest on cutting-edge alt media broadcasts on YouTube and other platforms, and we're honored to have him on the show today. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Mr. Brett. I appreciate being here.
Great. Well, let's kind of get a little background, if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience. I'm sure some of them are going to be familiar with your work, and some of them aren't. So, if you could kind of give us a broad brush of your past and how you got to where you are, and how you realized who you are, and those kinds of things.
Well, over my early childhood and into life, I had a number of experiences that are remarkable. And I was as mystified by some of them as anyone I'd ever try to talk to about it. But it didn't come together for me until after 1974, when I had an experience in Utah that brought it all home. Okay.
And what was that?
I was proving out some gold claims on the Little Dolores River down near the confluence of the Little Dolores and Gunnison, that in turn confluences with the Colorado. And I had some people with me, so I went into Grand Junction in order to get supplies. On the way back, it was very late. I'd come across the desert, which took about 4 hours. And I pulled up on a ridge, and above me, or below me, was a ridge canyon, and with a wash. And it must have been around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. And as I closed the back of my little Datsun 510 station wagon, I was fixing to fix a little place to lay down. I saw these lights, and they were moving around, they following a path around a tower formation, and then coming back and going out of sight around a cliff. And I watched them, and I was curious. So I started walking down to the wash, and I got about halfway down, maybe a little more. And I felt something in my mind which said, go back, lay down, wait until morning. And so I did. And the next morning, like you might describe dreaming, things started coming into my mind, and just a torrent. Things connecting, and I realized what was going on below the ground there, and that this was an incredible operation. And I knew that across the way in the La Salle Mountains was an underground base like Dulce, and it was built to monitor what was going on there. But it was an EMV operation, and it's responsible for helping hold your planet together.
Could you define for us EMV for those who may not know what that means?
Electromotive vehicle. That's the name that Dr. Berggren gave them when he discovered them in the rings of Saturn.
Okay.
And of course, I respect him. I consider his contributions to astrophysics and science to be tantamount with Galileo Galilei, Copernicus, and a number of other people that have made much lesser contribution and are well remembered in history and science.
Very good. Okay, so what happened from there?
Well, it changed me. For the first time in my life, I felt I had some true focus. And I began conducting my life along different standards, different objectives, and eventually acquired a great deal of knowledge, not just on Earth, but elsewhere. And I knew what the EMVs were, what they were inside. Many of the anomalies that are never dealt with on this planet, ignored, just put in a box, put on a shelf under the word anomaly, which is supposed to be a mystical finale. I became more or less highly interested not obsessed, but highly interested in resolving. And I've done a lot of that. I resolved a lot of anomaly. Of course, that's something that gets picked up eventually, but not to my credit ever.
Yeah, that's pretty common. We see that quite a bit, where people come up with amazing ideas, inventions, and things, and then of course they're never getting credit for it. And many times their inventions and their ideas, intellectual property, is stolen by government entities or corporations, and that sadly we see that happen way too often.
Well, it has never bothered me as long as they're true to the truth. But when they try to edit and change it to suit themselves and their mindset, I don't like it. And, then I'll speak out against it, but not out of spite or jealousy or anything, but out of, I appreciate the truth and accuracy, and that's the only thing I'm going to deal with.
Yeah, I think we all have that intent that we're definitely seeking the truth. We want the truth. And that's one of the reasons why we're happy to have you here, because you've done a lot of research into that and you've discovered a lot of truths. And if you would, give us some background on the EMVs. What exactly are they? Are they a consciousness? Are they technology? What exactly are they? What is their function in our world, and what do they do? Give us some background on that, if you would, please.
They're throughout the universe. The methodology behind them exceeds even the highest form of spiritual technology. They are deemed very significant to ET cultures, whether they're collective or single. And they're often referred to as the hand of God. They are responsible for providing cultures with the energy that they need to perform tasks that help them control their situation in their solar system, and sometimes even in their part of the galaxy. Nothing is happenstance. I mean, we are told that given enough time, planets observe a perfect sphere. We're told given enough time that they adopt and terraform themselves. We're told that given enough time, the deadly gases become something else. And that's all BS. This is all predetermined in a way that orchestrates it. It's designed. People that, on one hand, believe the biblical narrative, at the same time doubt so many things that are in the Bible that would persuade them to view what I'm saying in a less than cynical manner. But they don't, because they're confused, they're divided, they're ambivalent, and this is the state of man on earth, and it enslaves him.
So from your perspective, obviously we see this, this battle that's taking place. There is in fact a war against humanity. And, there are many people who look outside of, our societies, our cultures, our human cultures, and hope and pray that there are ETs or other beings out there who are, possibly going to step in and help us, or at least give us some advice. And because we are on a slave planet. we are completely enslaved and controlled by, various entities. And, people are hoping that there's going to be something or someone or out there that's going to help us. Are these EMVs, in fact, doing any of that?
Of course, the only reason that your planet has had any lifetime at all as a viable, livable planet, because otherwise you'd be decimated by a CME every 17 years that would destroy virtually all mammalian life, and a lot of the poor critters that live deep in the oceans. So, and there are a lot of astrophysicists that understand that and wonder why that doesn't happen, because these CMEs, they leave the sun quite often enough. And here a while back, there's a NASA video of one heading directly for Mercury and an EMV wrapping itself around Mercury to protect it from that CME. Now, what they do in the sun is another thing. You have flares caused from solar storms that build up, and we call them sunspots. Then they build up. The EMVs whip them out, which is like keeping them from forming the intensity that would develop into a CME. There's a difference between a CME and a solar flare. Solar flare's plasma is pulled back to the sun by the sun's gravity. But a CME is so powerful that its plasma escapes that gravity and travels on into space until it hits something. And whatever it hits is going to be in trouble.
So on the very macro level, they are protecting our environment. But yes, as far as what on the more human everyday level, they basically leave that up to us. Is that correct?
Well, they don't interfere with mortals.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. And so what is your assessment right now? Where are we at? A lot of people talk about the secret space program and the idea that humans already have super advanced technology that's being hidden from us. We already have anti-gravitic craft or plasma-powered craft, or all kinds of ideas are thrown out there. Where are we at with all this? Do we in fact have that? Or what is going on as far as all that stuff? Is any of it going to be revealed? Is any of it going to be put to our use, or are we going to just continue on in this slave situation?
The drive is there. You have the ability to space travel, at least within your solar system, not another star system. But you don't have the ability to protect any life that's inside such a craft. You can't even go past the Van Allen belt. You kill any life inside, and you don't have the metal that ETs and EBs have in theirs that protect them from the particle bombardment, cosmic particle bombardment, and the radiation from various isotopic elements that concentrate at the Van Allen belt. The Van Allen belt's like a grid on a car. You go out there and you got all kinds of bugs on it. Well, on the Van Allen belt, it has caught all this deadly radiation and holds it. But it, in a way, it is protecting us. In another way, it's preventing us from exploring. Now, we have had bases on the Mars and bases on the Moon until they were the people there were run off, and they were run off because they were weaponizing them. But,
now, what time frame was that?
From 78 to 84.
Okay, so those folks with the advanced technology in the secret space program figured out how to get past the Van Allen belt.
No, they had EB craft. The EBs piloted them because we can't pilot them. They're integrated in a way that we can't conform to. EVs put their hand in a handprint, and that's all the instrumentation they need.
Okay.
But EVs aren't here anymore.
So who is here interfacing with humans on that level? Are there any other entities out there, extraterrestrial races? Are there those races living within the Earth, or is that myth?
Members of the extended community and blondes, who are members as well, but they are Earth-based. I mean, originally, have tried. They met with Eisenhower. They've met with Truman. They have offered to, back when the EBs were here, they're problematic. They offered to get rid of the EBs, and the generals that were at these conferences all said, "Well, will you give us technology?" And the ET said, "No, we won't give you technology. We'll just help you get over the hump." And the general said, "No, well, the EBs will give us technology. A lot of good it has done us. I mean, it's nice to have a LED light, isn't it? It's nice to have transistors, solid state, whatever. Yeah, but we don't need it."
Mm-hmm. Is it true, the story that we've heard, that President Eisenhower made deals with the Greys to get technology in exchange for a certain amount of humans to be allowed to be abducted and experimented on?
No. Covert Black Ops is responsible for that, and they're responsible for the abductions. They're responsible for, in the last few years, for every single one of these abductions. Bear in mind, none of these abductions are ever witnessed off-site, and they would be if they were actually what was happening. What is happening is the scenario is being broadcasted into the target's mind from a power grid or a vehicle that they can't see, and they believe these things are happening to them. But they want you to believe that there's something there, but they want to define it for you. And today they're in a quandary because they have debunked all of these UFO experiences and reality of UFOs as much as they could, because they wanted to keep the lid on it until the time came that they could have their little false flag, hostile alien attack. Now they don't have EB's craft to produce the UFOs, so now they're concentrating on something else.
And what's that?
Oh, well, false flags more than anything else. If we get your guns, you haven't got a chance.
Exactly. Yeah, that seems to be the push right now. The vaccination push, the push to take all the guns away from people, the interface. The vaccines are directly applied to the interface with the artificial intelligence, and it seems to me anyway that that's what the intent is at this point in time.
Well, it's just like Warner von Braun had an assistant, Carol Rosin, and he told her that there'd be 3 stages to implementing the New World Order. The first one would be the greenhouse effect, what we call global warming today. The second one is asteroids, and the third one is a hostile ET attack.
Yeah, so we haven't really seen the asteroid super threat yet. Do you think they're still going to roll that out, or they've changed the plan?
Well, they don't know the difference between a comet and an asteroid, do they?
Well, if you can't, the public NASA that communicates with the populace, we know is a total fraud anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that they said they went to the moon in those silly craft that they paraded out and did all these things in the late 60s, early 70s, when they, in fact, now talk about on their own website and on their own broadcast that they can't get past the Van Allen belt, but yet they cannot admit that they didn't actually go, that they faked it. And now the joke of the universe is that they lost the technology, and that idiot astronaut, I can't remember his name right now, but he says, we lost the technology and it's a painful process to try and get it back. And of course they lost all the telemetry tapes, supposed telemetry. It's just absurd and ridiculous and amazing how they can bamboozle so many people.
Well, Stanley Kubrick produced that phony moon landing.
Yep.
He gave every clue in the world in Eyes Wide Shut and in The Shining.
Yep.
It got him killed. When he did it not only did he go that far in Eyes Wide Shut, but he also showed some of the evil practices of the elite. And that was unforgivable. That got him killed.
Yeah. And it's amazing when you get that close to the truth, you're in big trouble in this world and the good thing is, though, so much of this stuff is being revealed so that possibly we have some way of getting rid of it at some point. I mean, we realize that the world is run by satanic pedophile idiots, who are psychopaths. And, they rise to power because they help themselves, they help each other, they have the same agendas, they have a unending greed and desire for power, which the average person out there has no desire for any of that stuff. But they've been able to place themselves over time in all these positions of power, and now we're having to deal with the result of these idiots.
Well, that's right. I wrote a little piece here recently about, as a comment that I made on a post on my wall, Facebook. And I said that, if you weren't a psychopath wanting to prey on humanity, would you want to be in control? If you had any sense or you weren't stupid?
No, not at all.
There is a lot of people that think we need more regulations. That's control. We don't need regulations. We need the law enforced equitably for everybody. We don't need a set of laws for Mr. Gates and Soros and whatever. We need a set of laws for everybody across the board. That'll solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and we see that there is definitely two sets of laws, two sets of ability to function in society with those people, the controllers, and the rest of us. And we see them commit all kinds of crimes and atrocities, and their buddies in the legal system, our so-called just us system, which is basically hammering just us and not them. They are able to get away with pretty much anything that they want to do. And you're right. Your point is well taken that we have to have the ability to enforce the law equally across, all of our society and not have this, class system going on where the haves, they have the best justice that money can buy. They have the best politicians that money can buy because they own them. Basically the politicians, which are the front people, are, wholly owned subsidiaries of banks and corporations and other entities that have money. And
indeed.
We have, there's no shortage of people who are willing to, go in those positions and carry out whatever they're told as long as they, make that cash register ring. And it's sad, really, and it's a reflection of our society, unfortunately, that we have so many people without a moral compass that are willing to, step up and lie to the people and say, oh, we're here to serve the people. And in fact, it's just the opposite. They're there to serve themselves and the agenda of these globalist psychopaths.
Well, that's very true. And, there is every difference in the world between any of those 12 leading contenders for the nomination in the Democrat Party for 2020 and someone like President Trump. President Trump is focused. He has a mission. They don't have a mission. They want power. That's no mission at all.
Well, the good thing about Trump is that, he can't really be bought because he already has money. And that's the difference. These other clowns, so many of them get into Congress, and they really don't. May have some money, but by the time they've been in there a few years, they're multi-millionaires. And this is a result of insider trading, and pay for play, and all these other games that they have going on. And there's all these side deals and things with the CIA and other entities out there. Weapons for drugs, drugs for weapons. All this insider trading that goes on outside of government, but all these entities participate in there, and they get a piece of it, and they get their cut and look the other way so that these things don't get investigated. And it's a sad thing that's going on, and we see it right in our face these days.
Well, for the people that are confused about this, they want to think of all capitalists being robber barons. Well, think about these millionaire politicians. They've all been corrupted, or they wouldn't have millions of dollars, would they?
That's exactly right.
Someone that's earned it, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and maybe they had a start or whatever, but certainly not to become a billionaire. They build hotels, they hire all kinds of people, they add to the economy, they give jobs to people of different walks of life without any concern about their social background or their race or whatever, like President Trump. And it just does not reach these left-wingers in their belief that we'll try a new ideology, and even though it has a very tattered history, we'll just overlook that because we'll make it different,
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you see, I like some of the things that Trump has done, and I think, those are very positive for our society, but there are some things that disturb me as well, because you've got the close ties to Israel. And it's almost like the Israel can do no wrong, when in fact we see them conducting a genocide against the Palestinian people, which has been going on since the late 40s.
I'm concerned about that just as much. They talk about, when they're talking about the Holocaust, they talk about the Warsaw Ghetto, and yet they do something even worse. Their Gaza Ghetto, and they want to tell you something that came out before the Russian Revolution was about Zionism, where it came from, and they quote the something of elders.
It's the protocols of the learned elders of Zion,
right? And they say, well, all of that was just propaganda put out by the Duke under Nicholas II to start the pogroms. Well, that's a lie. It's in the Talmud, and that is what people today are being compelled to follow in Israel over the Torah. The Torah, it's biblical, but the Talmud is the most evil book ever written.
Oh, it's disgusting. If you ever really read what's in there, is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, and if you're not Jewish, you're Goyim. If you're not the right kind of Jewish, we'll kill you. Goyim have no souls, and what we do to them is permissible, no matter what. And, it's just, it's the most animalistic thing ever written.
Yeah, and, David Icke recently came out with a book called Triggered, and in there he describes this group that we're talking about, and they're not they've unfortunately used the Jewish people in such a way as to deflect the attention that they should be getting for the things that they're doing, and he calls them Sabbatean Jews. They're not the Jews of the Torah like you were talking about. They follow this bizarre Sabbatean satanic belief system, that makes them feel like it basically anything goes, and whatever they need to do to collect their power and to install this globalist world government is justified in their minds.
Well, if you really want to be historically correct, you have to face that all these religions or ethnic racist beliefs emanate from myths. Look at for instance, let's be honest and look at the Mormons today. They base their belief on one of the most absurd myths that's ever been concocted. And we have it because it's historically recent. We have it for what it is. And when South Park made a joke out of it, they didn't depart from the reality at all. And it was so funny. Mm-hmm. And, and the Jews have done the same thing. All of us, all of these religions have done it to some extent. I like the Christian belief, not because that's how I was raised, because I'm not religious, but I like the Christian belief because it gives us the 10 Commandments, and I can't find anything wrong with them. If I get a Bible and I look at the red writing, which is what Christ actually is supposed to have said, I can't find anything wrong with it. But you take the Talmud and you take the Quran and I can find things wrong with them.
Yeah.
I mean, contradictory, self-contradictory. And I'm not saying that the Bible hasn't been edited, hasn't had entire books taken and thrown out of it that make up the Apocrypha today. And, there's so many things in it that I would dispute. But, the Catholic Church had a monopoly on it for how many years? 700 years?
Yeah.
You translated any other language than Latin. And, if you did, you were a heretic, and heretics were burned at the stake.
That's right. To me, all these religions are mind boxes, and they're set up. The Christian principles certainly make a lot of sense. Like you said, the 10 Commandments are just like the Golden Rule. They're things to live by. And if humanity did that, we'd be in a much better position than we are today. But we have so many people that have no interest in that whatsoever. It's just all self-service and greed and control. And that's what we see the focus is for these folks today. And we are literally in a war with these people. It's a spiritual battle. It's also a very physical battle because we see how they are poisoning us, poisoning our food, poisoning our water, poisoning our air with the chemtrails. And it's doing all of these things, right in our faces, but yet humanity is so distracted. They're distracted by the political theater. They're distracted by all forms of entertainment, massive amounts of entertainment of every type and possibility, and games and computers and cell phones in their face, that they don't really see these things.
I was watching a series. I watch a lot of movies and television series. A lot of them I'll start and then give up on, but I was watching one here recently called Sparta. It's Russian, and it involves how a particular game, because the test group that this game was used on was a eugenicist, and he was preaching this stuff to the members that were playing this game together, and he was able to influence them inside the game to a point where they were dehumanized. They were capable of murder. They were capable of lying bald-facedly and feeling justified by it. And they destroy their teachers. They destroy this detective, all with farce, all with, premeditated fraud, and have no compunction about it whatsoever to the man and woman. And, I'm looking at what I see in the left California, Oregon, Washington State. These kids out there, they're so self-righteous in their political correctness, it's useless to try to even talk to them. I mean, they'll tell you, well, no, we don't read. We don't have to read in school. Why would we want to read? Yeah, I hear that. I hear that from people I know. And so you don't have any history. You don't have civics. You don't have a moral compass. I mean, so they run around screaming because the guy that they didn't want to get in the White House got in the White House, so they're screaming their lungs out.
Yeah, it's everybody's a victim of some type today. So you get to pick your victimhood. You know, how are you being oppressed? You know, that seems to be the focus on on the globalist agenda and their mostly the democratic leanings of people. And this is what's being preached in, this ideology is being preached in all the universities these days. And unfortunately, humans are very susceptible to mind control and programming.
Well, when the era of it, the American era of it, started to oust Joseph McCarthy in his witch hunt against communists.
Mm-hmm.
And remember how we were all made to feel guilty because they executed 2 traitors that sold hydrogen bomb secrets to the Soviets? Remember?
Yep.
Oh, we had done a terrible thing, right? And, and it actually brought his Red Scare to a halt. But the fact of the matter is, looking at it now, Joseph McCarthy, in my book, didn't go far enough.
Yeah, because they just kind of went underground for a while and continued. And they haven't stopped. And now there's no hiding any of that. They just come right out and say, yeah, we're socialists and we're happy about it.
Yeah.
And it's just another system of centralized control. And people, these kids today, well, we want free stuff. They want free healthcare, free education. And, that wouldn't be such a bad thing if we didn't have these rabid psychopaths running the whole thing, because, their agenda is not to help humanity. Their agenda is to, serve themselves and bolster their power base. So by, rolling out all these perks, that these kids think they're entitled to, it's just another carrot dangling in front of them, thinking that this is going to be a good thing. But it just wraps them into that whole globalist system where you have a small group of people running everything. So you'll get healthcare, but you'll get their kind of healthcare. You'll get the kind of healthcare that, will alter your DNA. You'll get vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations that will destroy your immune system.
Of life counseling.
Yeah, you'll get plenty of that.
But that's the start of.
Oh, we have to laugh to keep from crying. I mean, the situation is really bad. It's really sad, and it's very frustrating because we can see these things, being rolled out right in our face, and then they're able to program these people to be cheerleaders for them, as if this is something wonderful in our world. It just blows my mind. It really does. And while I'm thinking about it, I'd like to encourage anybody out there listening, if you want to jump in the chat and ask a question of James, or if you want to just, give us a call, it's right there on the homepage of the website for KCORadio.com. And you're welcome to ask any questions that you want to. So I wanted to just throw that out there. James, on the break, we were talking about Microsoft, and you mentioned that they reached a point where they were getting ready to go out of business a while back. And let's talk about what happened there.
Well, the DOD and the Justice Department had an antitrust suit against Bill Gates, and they were going to break up his corporation. And so that was in the papers, and everybody was concerned because, it was going to affect a lot of people. And all of a sudden, it just went away. And then within basically almost within that year, Germany, who had bought all of their government computer systems, operating systems from Microsoft, bundled them all back up and sent them back with a remark like, if we wanted to network with Langley,
meaning the CIA,
work with, you know, if we wanted to network, we would network with them. And so what had happened, they had discovered that their operating systems were backdoored. All Microsoft operating systems are backdoored. You have no privacy.
Right. And that brings to mind the Inslaw Promise software, which was stolen from the original inventors of that software. And the same thing basically happened there, where they wrote back a backdoor into the software and then began to sell it to other countries to use, so that we could constantly spy on what's going on in these other countries. And now we see that the spy program has so greatly accelerated into our social media, into our computer systems for everybody. And then we have these instruments called cell phones that are literally recording and tracking everything that we do.
Well, 5G will go much further than that.
So let's talk about 5G. You know, they're seriously pushing this, and it seems like it's their, you know, the final nail in the coffin that they need to establish even greater control over humanity. As Alana Freeland refers to it as full spectrum dominance of the human, well, actually of the entire world in every way, shape, or form, including weather and everything else. The 5G, it seems to me, from the studies that I've seen and from lectures that I've listened to, is quite damaging to living biology.
Yes, the microwave radiation. The fact is that has variable controls. It even will have controls that can affect behavior, can kill. It's 10 times worse than what we went through in the 60s with when the Soviets were hitting our embassy in Moscow with microwave. Mm-hmm. And it was affecting people there and causing harm. And we made a big deal about it, but we were in a hurry, you know, to do the same thing in our embassies elsewhere. And this is, have you ever heard of psychotronics?
Sure.
Well, you know that up until about 7 or 8 years ago, psychotronic devices were sold online. You could get their catalog, you could find out what they did, the cost, everything, order them online. And they tell you what they do. You want to not give everybody in your neighborhood a bad headache? You want the spouses to all fight? You want whatever you want to do, you can do that with these devices. And, you know, the most I saw any of them were about 800, and they started from about 75 and went up. But you could buy them. And then all of a sudden the government comes along and, you know, especially their covert black ops people say, oh, well, this is too good to share. So it went underground. It became the province of the government. And now you can't go on. You can't even find the word psychotronic anywhere online. Psychotronic.
Interesting how certain subjects get scrubbed off the internet.
Well, you know, give you a good case in point. Have you ever, are you familiar with reverse speech?
Yes.
The fellow who takes the credit for it is David Oates. And I've been to visit David Oates when he lived in Plano. David Oates was sponsored by the FBI to come to the United States after they discovered that what he was doing was a little bit more than just trying to show that there were radio implants in these songs and whatever, but that there actually was reverse speech coming from the subconscious to correct the lies and disingenuous messages from the conscious mind.
reverse speech. And that's a fascinating thing. And it became pretty popular and pretty, I would say, well known in the 90s with a lot of people discussing it. And then it just kind of went off the the common trail for everybody. I haven't heard a whole lot about it recently, and I think that's probably by design. But let's continue on with that, if you would, James.
I think the best one of the best ways to approach reverse speech is comparing it with dowsing. Both provide the subconscious with a way of communicating past the restraints of the conscious mind. The conscious mind is deadly afraid of the subconscious because it is eat up with control. It's acquired that from the way you're raised. It's eat up with control, and the subconscious isn't. And it'll correct you when you lie. It'll correct you when you're disingenuous. Anytime that they're, because it hates that. And you have a split consciousness, which allows you to be hypnotized. That's not good. And the people that, I look at it this way. You could take a race of people or a species of people that have one appendage and it drags the ground as they walk. And they'll sublimate that, won't they? They'll sublimate that into being evolutionary. They'll sublimate, and, just like they have done hypnosis. They try to sublimate it. And sublimate and hypnosis is something that wouldn't be there if you had unified consciousness and had adequate access to both the collective consciousness and genetic memory, which you only touch upon every once in a while. And when you do, people have revelations, don't they? They learn past life experiences. They learn all kinds of things about themselves, but they can't identify it for what it really is, and it passes and it's gone because you only occasionally access it. But unified consciousness has got it at their command.
Now, do you think the fact that we are unable to normally access the subconscious, that was something that was genetically engineered into our species, or what's your thoughts on that?
It was the consequence of keeping your moon in orbit around Earth, because the moon is the wrong size, it's the wrong distance from Earth, it's not composed of solid matter. It is got hollow. It has cavities in it with oil, with water. It has all kinds of problems to make it an imperfect moon for Earth or Mars. So there has to be adjustments made to keep it in orbit, or else at a certain perihelion point, it wants to come in or it wants to go out. So there are adjustments that are made. And people have recently been able to detect these gravity waves going across the surface of the moon. They'd see them likewise going across the surface of Earth if there wasn't so many impairments to seeing them.
Yep.
And this is necessary. There are machines in the moon and engines on Earth that work together to keep that moon in place, because you guys, that's your home base, is that moon. That's you came into this system on that moon 350,000 years ago, slightly less than that. And you position yourself on Mars first, and after 50,000 years, you screwed that up, just like you're screwing up the Earth here. I'm looking at this as an outsider, so I'm not being very nice.
Yeah, well, there's no point in sugarcoating what's going on, because it's right in our face, and we have ourselves.
You're aware, Mr. Brent, you're aware of it.
Yeah.
So I don't have to apologize to you. I just don't want to upset your audience.
Well, I think my audience, generally, most of them are going to be aware of that possibility, and they're not going to be offended by it, because by and large, the people that listen to this show are interested in learning the truth. And we always talk about having an open mind and how important that is, because if you don't have an open mind, you cannot learn and you cannot grow. And so even though somebody may not agree with everything that you say or I say or anybody else says, we at least have the ability, or we should have the ability, to look at it and pay some attention to it and give it a chance, and see if it has any merit, see if there's something to it. And the moon certainly seems to be a technology of some kind. It doesn't seem to have any really natural attributes. Many people have measured the fact that it gives off its own light and it's not reflecting the sun's light, and it's obviously not reflecting the sun, because if you look at the angles of the light on the moon to where the position of the sun is, you realize immediately that it doesn't correspond.
There are a number of anomalies associated with the moon, and these were recorded for 300 years by astronomers. And these are called transient lunar phenomena, and you might still be able to find some. They were classified in 1938. At the same time that the green canali on Mars disappeared. Then the transient lunar phenomena became classified. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that the H.G. Wells story was sold in that radio program that horrified everybody about invasion from Mars was that people knew about the canali, and they knew that they were being fed by the caps that were at the South Pole and North Pole of Mars, that greatly lessened after 1938 and dried up the canali. They were green. So
tell us what the canali are.
They're canals. It's the French canali is canal.
Okay.
And because it's a French astronomer that first named them. And, so they were dug. They were, man-made. And one thing I'll give Hoagland, who is a NASA gatekeeper, is he explored the remains there, the pyramids, the number of, the face on Mars, which, NASA claimed that, that it turned out just to be a pile of rubble. That's not true. That's not true. You don't see from space, you don't see less definition up close than you see from space. And definition from space showed you as a face on Mars. It wasn't a pile of rubble. And, there was a bunch of projects that were projections of what they were going to do if they could figure out how to get the metal that's needed to actually be protected when you go past the Van Allen belt and you get into space and protect you from the cosmic radiation. They had intended it by 2007 to have a manned mission to Mars, Phobos base. Now, Phobos is an extreme anomaly too. Phobos is hollow. It's made of metal. It's not a moon. It's an artificial satellite.
But they call it a moon.
Yeah, they call it a moon, just like they called the V's migrating moons when they were in the rings of Saturn. Although moons don't migrate, by definition, a moon has a fixed orbit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So no such thing as a migrating moon. But NASA is full of contradictions like that.
Oh, you can't believe anything that NASA says. They're a propaganda arm that's out there to
you're my man, Mr. Brent.
can confuse the public as much as possible.
Right.
And their own
never a straight answer.
Never. And if you look at their own pictures of the Earth, for instance, none of them are the same in perspective of the continents, all kinds of stuff. It's all CGI artwork. So we have never had a real picture to look at.
Subscribing for people that want to check out this area in Utah I was talking about, I've given them directions. Nobody will go there. I don't know because they think I'm scary or what I'm talking about is scary, but they won't go there. So what I do is I use the Dewey Bridge in Utah.
And what part of Utah is this?
It's about 40 miles above Moab. Do you know where Moab is?
Yes.
Okay, it's not very far out of Grand Junction, but in order to get to where I go, you have to go across the desert. It's a Jeep trail, and it takes about 4 hours to get across it in a vehicle.
That's quite a trick, quite a trek on, in a four-wheel drive.
Yeah, it is. You go down at creek beds and stuff like that. I had a little 510 Datsun. It did really well because it's narrow, but still I carried a sledgehammer, and every once in a while I'd see a boulder in the road that was stuck, partially buried. I have to get out and knock it down to keep it from hitting my oil pan. So, I down there on the Little Dolores is good gold, good placer gold. And you have to know how to catch it. And, I met prospectors. I had good friends that were prospectors down there that had claims along the Little Dolores, past where it confluenced with the Gunnison. The Gunnison comes around, confluences with it, and then both of them, the confluence of those two, go into the Colorado.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking at a map right now. I can see what you're talking about.
Well, they have, you go down the Colorado just a few miles, and over on the right is one of the biggest placer mines in the country, gold placer mine. And they have trucks out there. They got all kinds of equipment. They got separation tables, Humphrey spirals, the whole 9 works, 9 yards. But anyway, they believe falsely that gold is coming down from the, up above, either from the Gunnison or it's coming from up higher on the Colorado than those confluences. But it's not. It's coming down from Leadville and by way of the Dolores. And, I've known a lot of people that have made it understanding that. So if any of our people out there with gold going up the way it is want to go out there and learn about sluice boxes and Humphrey spirals and how to set up something, take my advice. Don't run the operation on the basis of how many cubic feet you run a day. Run it on how you keep your equipment and the settings of the equipment until you start catching that fine gold. Because some of it will even float on water. So you got to change the turbidity of the water, and you do that by changing its density. So I made you guys rich.
That's awesome.
Well, the young, youthful guys, the youth today is my wholehearted concern. The kids who are denied a good education, like we got, I know you did.
Yep.
And they denied that, so I try to help them in every way I can. And if you're fancy free, if let loose, and you want to strike out and make it on your own, you can pour boy it. I do a little bit better than using a pan. I would get a small sluice and some way to vibrate it. Put ripples in it and cocoa mat and get it set right where it starts catching that gold. The gold needs to collect at the ripples and then go down into the cocoa mat, and then every other week or so, take that cocoa mat out and shake it. Dry it out, shake it.
So they allow people to mine for gold in that area still?
Well, yeah, sure. It's open. You can go out there and claim, quick claim. There are a lot of places where and listen, if somebody really wants some advice, some way bills, I'll give them to them, because I want people to have their independence. I want them to have a way of getting away from the system, being under the thumb of anybody. It's a good way to do it. It's a good way to do it. And I can tell you, you can find evidence of where the Spanish were working, where the Indians were working. There are places all over the country where you'd be surprised, silver, gold, whatever. You can find you can find signs to places like that. And I started out on the Gunnison River. It wasn't the best claims available. I ended up down on the Little Dolores, and they were good. And if you know how you're sensitive to setting the vibration of a separation table, and the water flow across it and the angle, if you can make all those settings right, you start catching gold that one day you can soon retire on.
Nice. I like that idea.
Well, look, I have a lot of respect for independent people. I have a lot of respect for people that want to take a chance and go out and stay within their means. You don't have to bankrupt yourself, or, these student loans are just, I hope to God they get rid of the IMF. And all these student loans are tied up with central banking and the IMF. Cancel them. Go on the gold standard, get rid of the IMF and the IRS now.
Absolutely. That's, part of the slave system. And we're seeing that, a lot more people are becoming aware of that. In 1913, our Congress sold us out to a private group of, cabal bankers who've been harvesting us ever since. And their collection agency, the IRS, has, been milking the populace ever since then. And, this is totally unnecessary. The taxes are not necessary to run anything. It's a control system, and people need to see it for what it is. We don't need this. We don't need the Federal Reserve. If government's going to be involved in it, it should be completely transparent, and we should have control over where all that money goes. Right now, we have no idea. There's missing trillions, which is mind-boggling, just to think about how much money that is and what that money could have done had it not been, farmed out to nefarious groups, corporations, banks, and other entities that are using it for their own purposes.
They just bailed out another bank.
Yeah, we're so far from what the original founders envisioned for this country. It's just absurd. Everything is upside down in that regard. And if we want to be free, that's one of the things we have to start with is, the whole banking system is completely corrupt. And Henry Ford had a quote from the 30s where he said that if the American people ever actually understood their own money system, there'd be a revolution overnight. Yeah. And that is so true, but how do you get that information to people? Because they're constantly propping up the legitimacy or the supposed legitimacy of all of that.
He had a dark side, but he also had a very good side.
Yep.
He went to war with automakers in Detroit over the fact that he was going to pay his workers $2.50 a day.
Yeah, and that was big money back then.
That was big money, and so they put a hit out on him. And, of course, he knew how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. So finally, after a war, he walked in. They had a big meeting in Detroit, and he walked in and he says, look, I want my workers to be able to buy my car.
Yep.
And that said it all. He walked out. Nobody looked twice at him. They were looking at the floor. But that changed everything. And of course, it was the biggest boon to middle-class economy there was, because it made one industry after another change for the better for the working class.
We've got a question for you, James, I assume it's from our chat group. Jude is asking, why did they take all small portable tape recorders off the market? I'm assuming she's referring to the reverse speech ones and ones that could be reversed. And she's saying, I'd like to reverse speech my own language even.
Well, my answer I'm going to give is highly simple. and maybe oversimplified. It may not be true in all cases, but generally, so the left could carry on a narrative of constant lying better.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because it would make it so much easier for us to see what they're actually, what they're actually saying on that subconscious level, which doesn't lie, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I was watching a hearing today, and I mean, the lies were spectacular. I mean, the misquotes, the lies, everything was just totally spectacular. You know, how they would spin a narrative from what somebody said by misquoting them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody does that better than or worse than the damn demo rats.
Yeah, and we're seeing that I believe it's the NDAA bill that was passed a few years ago actually makes it legal for media outlets to use propaganda, and the government to use propaganda and not have to be accountable for it, and basically gives them license to lie. And we're seeing that. But the good thing is, it is becoming more transparent to a lot more people. And I've said this many times on the show that back in the 90s, it seemed completely hopeless to me because so few people were able to see anything of these subjects that we're talking about. But now that we have the proliferation of the internet, we also have the ability to get our message out there, which we never had before, because, the media was, television, radio, and newspapers, magazines for the most part. But now we do have, anybody can start up their own show. We have massive access to research and things like that, which we never had before. And so the double-edged sword is definitely there. And we're happy to take advantage of that. And I think that that's something that the dark side doesn't want us to use as the censorship clamps down on us. But we're going to continue no matter what. All right, we're coming up on the break once again. We have one more segment coming up in just a little bit, so stick around with us and send in your questions if you have any, or feel free to call in. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're with James Horak. We're having a very interesting conversation. And on the break there, we were just talking about some of the operatives that are used on these, dark projects and dark programs and mind control programs and things like that. And I know that from my experience with what we call spooks or people in that industry, the lie is different at every level. So, it's very easy to talk a lot of these people into thinking that they were doing something patriotic, something great for humanity, although what they're actually doing is horrific. But humans can be persuaded in that way. They can be totally confused and manipulated into doing just about anything. And of course, we see that same thing with the military that are completely bamboozled and fooled into thinking that they're fighting for our freedom as they invade foreign countries for empire. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I enjoy listening to you more than I enjoy listening to myself.
Well, just share with us what you were saying on the break about your experience with one of these guys.
I have had so many people come by unannounced. They'll give me a call from a filling station 2 or 3 blocks away. And I had 2 CIA youngsters. I mean, they were early 20s, and you can always smell them. And they came in and they were asking me questions and everything. I'm sitting there and listening to them, and smiling. What are you smiling about? I said, would you guys mind giving me your CIA ID numbers? And they said, how did you know? How did you know? That's the first thing they said. How do you know?
Oh, my gosh.
They have ID numbers,
Oh, I'm sure they do.
I had one researcher, CIA researcher, get with me. I was on a UFO forum, one of these email forums.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the lady that had it. I really liked her. She was a very sweet lady. And Well, anyway, I was talking about the Aurora crash that happened here close to where I live back in the 1890s. And so immediately after that, we had discussed that, I got a call from this. He actually called me on the phone first, and he said, I'm a CIA researcher, and I'd like to know everything you know about the Aurora crash. And I said, okay. So we traded information. And so I said, I want to know when Carswell Air Force Base was given the money to tunnel under the lakes, Eagle Mountain and Lake Worth, connect with a bunker that is at Kenneth Copeland's and goes all the way to Carswell, and then connects with a tunnel that goes all the way to California. And he said, no problem. He said, in 1978, there was secret appropriation of $68 billion for that.
Nice.
I said, okay. And so I told him some more about the Aurora crash, about the ranger that came down and got the body and took it back to Austin instead of it being buried where they say it was buried. This was a little dwarf-like ET. It wasn't an EB. In fact, the guy looked kind of like a leprechaun, so to speak.
Well, humanoid, but just short.
Yeah, they had a thunderstorm, and he tapped a windmill with his craft, and it crashed not in Aurora, but real close to Aurora. And that was an ET. And it's on record, and people have talked about it. They where the grave was supposed to have been dug, they tried to dig it up. It's not there. A Texas Ranger came down and took the body and took it back to Austin. And that was in the 1890s. Wow. Yeah. It's, they've talked about it on television, 2020 and all that. But, there's already been disclosure, full disclosure in Brazil. That's where they're going to have a big UFO conference. I wish I could go.
Yeah, I heard you mention that on another show. You share that with us? What went on there?
Well, it's I don't think it's happened yet. It's coming up, and the Brazilian ufologists are so far ahead because they had several months long flap on Colares. And Colares is a village that's on an island in the Amazon Delta. And it consisted of ETs from different cultures and different craft, scanning and taking a little bit of a biopsy from every member of that village, including the doctor who thought that everybody was just hysterical till it happened to her. They'd be walking out alone at night. A beam would hit them, freeze them, and scan them. And every once in a while, they'd notice a little gouge out part under their arm. And because, there was a collective of ETs that wanted to know what the hell was going on here. And if they could help. And what's interesting is that while it was going on, the Brazilian government sent a military contingent down to investigate while it was going on. And the officer in charge came forward 20 years after the fact to divulge his drawings and the fact that he had actually contact with one of the ETs.
Mm-hmm.
So that hit everything pretty hard. And as a result, both the government and the military in Brazil turned over all their UFO files to Brazilian ufologists. I think that's disclosure.
Yeah, and actually a lot of things have come out, like we talk about the Roswell thing and all that, but we never feel like we get the real story. We get a lot of propaganda about a lot of these events. And in your mind, how many ET species, races, or whatever are visiting us currently? Yeah. Are you aware of how many that might be and what they're actually doing?
Oh, it changes. It changes. I mean, it's probably two more to add to the list today. They come through because we are at the edge of a constellation, the Milky Way. It's a frontier, and they want to use our sun to transport themselves by gravity wave attenuation. And so they can go across the universe like that. If they have another star that's set up with what I call a solar anvil, like your sun, they can travel just like that from a million light years away, just like that.
Pretty amazing.
It happens, and my colleague caught a image from NASA, official NASA image of two coming through that solar anvil and then moving out away from the corona of the sun as fast as they could to conserve energy. It takes a lot of energy to insulate yourself from that heat.
Mm-hmm. We've got a couple questions here from the chat, James. If you don't mind, we'll just take those real quick. Callum is asking, does James know what factors dictated his soul to inhabit an American vessel at this point in human history? Considering that we believe in a source designer, was his appearance planned? I find it hard to believe in coincidences these days, he says.
Well, I know Callum. He's a very bright young man. And he's a friend of a colleague of mine and mine. And I think that's a rather devious way to be, Colin. Get me grounded out to that. But no, you were scheduled for an extinction, and the only way to avoid it was to make some sound arguments. Like, things are complicated here by the presence of the EBs that. People had to bear in mind split consciousness and its limitations, and that elitism has been practiced and perfected, and records of it exist in the halls of records that have been found and suppressed, like the papyrus from Tutankhamun's tomb, on and on and on. So because I was able to offer some winning arguments, we're going to go all the way. But the death of the Pacific Ocean is a big, big problem. And the fact that what was there is left, that's very important. What I call the cities of the sea. If it leaves the Atlantic, I'm afraid my arguments will lose. But if you get over the hump, and you might do it, then you're going to be in drastic need of some help to save this planet, because it will start dying very soon.
And how soon is that hump coming?
Immediately. All you have to do is be wise.
All right, we've got another question from Shane. He's saying, please excuse the subject being on the UK. We are all seeing this drawn-out charade of Brexit. I've recently been hearing constantly that Brexit was decided long ago, ultimately with a signing up to the EU Lisbon Treaty, which includes handing over our military, police, and freedom of speech. Is RIP Great Britain the case? In other words, is this really what transpired here?
Well, Brexit began as an alternative to central banking, as a way. The Chinese wanted to start printing currency backed by gold. That's when it began. But the modifications, when the English people voted for it, the modifications that were made by people like Merkel have changed its complexion and the way it is to be adapted. And this EU move for an army, or for, it began as a joint police effort. Every country was going to provide a faction of police to put down the riots, to put down the dissidents or whatever. What it's become is another thing entirely. And of course, that could be expected. We've seen good intentions here in this country, like building the wall, like trying to get a grip on runaway inflation, like trying to do the things to adjust our dollar since the petrodollar has gone down the toilet. To do all of these things being constantly fought. And that's what's happened to Brexit. Same thing. The modifications of it to suit the elite, the modifications to keep the people suppressed. And England is one of the worst countries for the suppression of freedom of speech, for a number of things. And, you really need to get rid of that monarchy.
Absolutely. That's an insult to humanity as far as
it is.
I'm concerned.
I would like to say one thing. You're in a secondary timeline. That's why you have a matrix. You don't know maybe entirely how truthful you are, how adequate in reality what you're calling a matrix in the matrix is, because you're in a second timeline. You're in the second timeline. In the primary timeline, Napoleon wins at Waterloo. And the great quandary among military science is how in the hell could he have lost? He lost by making a stupid blunder that it was not typical of Napoleon at all. And the reason for that was that recently they found a chip in his skull. Guess what that chip was? That chip didn't exist at the time that it was found, but it exists now.
Oh, a little time travel there?
Two ways, two different kinds of time travel. When Napoleon went into the pyramid, they knew exactly where he'd be, that he'd be alone. Perfect opportunity. And when he came out, he was different. He gets back to Egypt. What does he do? Makes himself emperor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound like a Napoleon that wanted to get rid of the monarchy, wanted to get, throw the Jesuits out of countries and shit?
No, it sounds like he wants to join their ranks or keep on their program.
Well, he changed. I mean, not entirely, but this chip gave him a bias, and it's a relatively. It didn't exist at the time that I brought this up. It didn't exist. It's a Clipper Generation 4 chip made by Motorola, right down the street from where I live.
That's awesome. It's such a crazy world.
It is. It is.
So what else would you like to? We only have a few minutes left. We got maybe 10 minutes left or 9 minutes. James, what would you like to get out there to people? What kind of a message do you want to send out to the masses? If everybody in the world was listening to James Horak right now, what would you say?
I want to see you succeed. I want to see you be able to become star children. That's your right. That was the right of your ancestors.
So Shane is asking, doesn't everything come back to the base timeline or the original timeline? Or will we continue on the timeline that we're on now?
The exceptions can be made. There, as a rule, the continuum is preserved at the expense of any timelines being removed. That since, the same people that say this sort of thing, that bring it up and make fictions out of it, one thing and another, also talk about, that you have a mirror self in the other timeline, and that's all hogwash. You have a complete set of circumstances that are operating independently. That different things are going to happen. You're not going to have a twin in the other timeline, or the other timeline's doing well. Other timeline will probably make it over the hump. But Napoleon won there, and the monarchy was removed.
And of course, that totally destroyed the Rothschild banking dynasty too. Then, right?
It never took off because what they did, they knew they were behind setting that up in relatively modern times to go back to affect that in order to have an outcome they wanted. And what they do, they went around, rumored that Napoleon had won at Waterloo. All the elite and rich and nobility were all selling off their goods, estates, and everything for pennies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah, which placed the Rothschilds second only to the king or to the throne of England. And
yeah, because they bought everything up at pennies on the dollar.
That's right. That's right. And of course, they'll say today that, oh, that was a dove that flew over the Atlantic crossing. Doves don't fly over the Atlantic crossing.
So how do we rejoin that good timeline?
You just have to be separate. You'll be separate. You don't want to rejoin it. You don't. It's like trying to get two mirrors in together. You don't want to. What you want to survive. You want to be fully manifested. You're not fully manifested. You got psychic blocks. You get hypnosis. You got all of these things, and a split consciousness on top of it. All of this creates what you call your sight, right?
It seems like we're at such an extreme disadvantage here.
You are.
And for us to overcome it would be an absolutely monumental feat. And
yeah, especially since you've had 6 extinctions already. Yes.
Yeah. We don't want to do that again. I know so many people, we all say, we've had enough of this. We want to make it work this time so that we can go on to the next adventure.
Well, the first thing you need to do is protect your children from pedophiles. And the only way you can do that is you get rid of the pedophiles. Get them off the face of the earth.
Yeah, I'm all for that. And these people are so disgusting and despicable.
Yeah, they are.
It's just unfathomable for anybody that has a soul, that has a conscience, that has a moral compass, that these people do what they do. And I'm glad to see more and more they are arresting people all over the place that are involved with this child trafficking and the child porn and things like that. I'm really glad to see a lot of people being arrested, but I would like to see the head chopped off of that thing, at the top level. It seems like most of the people that are arrested are at the lower levels of this monstrosity.
Well, I think that equally culpable is the media. Because what has the media done? Every time anything came out about Pizzagate, came out about Jersey Island, came out about any of these strongholds for pedophiles, what did the media do? Jump in, oh, this is just a rumor. Oh, this is exaggerated. Oh, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they bring in the spin doctors. And
they need to be put out of position of being able to propagandize and sell it to the American people.
Yeah, I agree totally. That's what we need. So we have to keep working until we get that. Let's make it work, everybody. Let's spread the information. Let's share the information with those who are willing to listen. And ultimately, this is a fight for freedom. It's something that we've never really had. We've had parts of it, but we've never had true freedom. And with true freedom comes responsibility, self-responsibility, and self-reliance. And those are attributes that are not promoted in this culture, in this society. But that's what we need to have in order to be free. And we have to always keep that in mind.
And stop blaming it all on capitalism, because capitalism is one way for an ambitious person that's got a great idea to win his independence from the system. And we all need that American dream. We all need it.
Yep.
It's just
James,
like,
we're coming to the very end of the show. Please tell people where they can find you, where they can find your book, where they can find your work.
well, if you come on, find me on Facebook and just send me an email, give me a message on Facebook, and I'll give you my email address. You send me an email, and in that email, just put "want book," and I will send you a free copy, an ebook copy of my book.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it. We're going to have you back. You've been listening to Inside the Matrix. Everybody have a wonderful evening.